This video is going to show you the content of one of the most forbidden and powerful books in the spiritual history of humanity, the Corpus Hermeticum, but not in a theoretical or distant way. You're going to understand why this text was hidden for centuries, what it really contains, who wrote it, how it can change your reality, and how to actually use it to access the divine power that already exists within you. And yes, this is real. In the next few minutes, you'll uncover teachings that were ripped from civilization, silenced by religions, ignored by scholars, but preserved by initiates who knew this knowledge could awaken something the system fears most, a human being aware of their inner power. If you feel like there's something asleep inside you, if you know your spirituality needs to go beyond pretty phrases, stick with me until the end, because this video was made to remind you of who you really are and show you, step by step, how to access that power now. The journey has begun. Long before religions were organized into temples and doctrines, there was a name that quietly circulated among the initiates. A name that wasn't spoken lightly. It appeared in the stone corridors of ancient Egyptian temples, in the Hermetic crypts of Greece, and even among the hidden manuscripts that survived history's flames. Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great, thrice master, thrice initiated. But who was he? Hermes Trismegistus isn't a regular figure, nor an ordinary man. He doesn't belong to just one culture or one era. He's the fusion point between two worlds, the Greek world, where Hermes was the messenger of the gods, lord of pathways, of the word, of transitions between worlds, and the Egyptian world, where Thoth, or Jehuti, was the sacred scribe, the master of wisdom, the patron of time and thought, the one who recorded cosmic decrees in the language of the Gades. When these two figures merged in the imagination of initiates, it wasn't just a symbolic name that was born. An archetype emerged. Hermes Trismegistus represents something greater, the living link between the divine and the human. He is the one who descends to the world carrying heavenly codes, but also ascends carrying with him the echo of human questions. He stands between gods and men, not as a hierarchical intermediary, but as a mirror of what we can become when we awaken the divine that still sleeps within us. The ancients believed Hermes wasn't just a wise man, but a lineage, a consciousness that incarnated more than once across the millennia to preserve sacred teachings. Some said he was an Atlantean, a survivor of the destruction of a forgotten civilization. Others, that he was an Egyptian priest, guardian of the mysteries of Hermopolis, who lived for hundreds of years. There are those who say he was the true author of the Emerald Tablet, from which all the Western occult schools would be born. But what really matters isn't whether Hermes existed as a person. What matters is what he represents, the intact memory that the human being is more than flesh and bone, that there is a divine spark in us, and that this spark can be lit through gnosis, contemplation, living wisdom. Hermes is the personification of spiritual intelligence, the kind that unites heaven and earth, not rational intelligence that calculates and measures, but the intelligence of the spirit that understands the invisible, that hears the unspoken, that recognizes the symbols in the spaces between reality. The intelligence that realizes all of creation is organized by principles, vibrations, correspondences. That's why Hermes Trismegistus was revered by alchemists, occultists, philosophers, and mystics for millennia. He was seen as the original master, the silent initiator, the source that nourished the Egyptian, Pythagorean, Platonic, and even esoteric Christian traditions. Clement of Alexandria, Lactantius, the sages of the Chartres school, Marsilio Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, Paracelsus, Giordano Bruno. They all saw in Hermes not a myth, but a transmitter of a primordial wisdom older than all religions. They said he had foreseen the spiritual decline of humanity, that he wrote his words not for his time, but for a future time. A time when people would forget their divine origin, when they would worship the body more than the spirit, form more than essence. Hermes wrote for when the world would be plunged into illusion and would need to remember. And now, these writings are back. They're revealing themselves to those who are ready. As if the very consciousness of Hermes were re-emerging among those who listen not just with their ears, but with their spirit. Because Hermetic teachings aren't read with the eyes, they're recognized. Something inside you recognizes them, as if it's just remembering something it knew before you were born. This is the true function of Hermes Trismegistus, to reignite the forgotten memory of the soul, to show that the divine was never outside of us. It was just asleep, and now it's awakening. Get ready, because at the center of this forgotten memory, there's a book, a silent book, but one that survived empires, wars, persecutions, and centuries of silence. A book that carries, between the lines, the best-kept secret of Western spirituality. The book is starting to reveal itself now, and its name is Corpus Hermeticum. A name that echoes like an ancient whisper through the layers of time, but that few truly know. When we hear about this book, it's easy to imagine it as just another esoteric text among so many others, but that's not what it is. The Corpus Hermeticum wasn't born from a single author or school. It was born from a deep silence, from a spiritual inheritance that resisted being forgotten. It survived the collapse of civilizations, the burning of libraries, religious persecution, and philosophical distortions. And even so, it remained, hidden, guarded, waiting for the right time to emerge. And that time has come. Centuries after the temples of Hermopolis were buried by the sands of time, a new city shone with power and decadence, Constantinople. It was the heart of the Byzantine Empire, and also the guardian of many ancient secrets that had been banished from the West. It was there, among forgotten manuscripts, that a collection of texts reappeared, 14 treatises written in Greek, attributed to none other than Hermes Trismegistus. But these texts weren't discovered by chance. What few people know is that the rediscovery of the Corpus Hermeticum is directly linked to one of the most enigmatic families of the Renaissance, the Medicis. Cosimo de' Medici, patriarch of that lineage, was more than a patron. He was an initiate, a man obsessed with the lost knowledge of antiquity. And he was the one who ordered a quiet search for ancient manuscripts that might contain primordial wisdom. Among those who answered this call was a monk, Leonardo da Pistoia, sent to Macedonia with a mission to find the works of Hermes. And he did. When the text reached Cosimo's hands, he didn't hesitate. He asked Marsilio Ficino, his personal translator, to immediately stop translating Plato. Yes, Plato, because the Corpus Hermeticum couldn't wait. There was something in those texts that demanded urgency. Ficino understood that, and when he began to read and translate, he realized he wasn't looking at ordinary philosophy. He was looking at a sacred code, a symbolic language that spoke of the soul, the universe, the mind, the spirit, creation, and eternity. An entire worldview hidden between lines that seemed simple but held infinite layers. These texts didn't teach how to think logically. They taught how to think symbolically. They spoke of the fall of man into matter and the possibility of returning to the original light. They described the birth of the world as a divine movement where everything is mental, everything is vibration, everything is a reflection of a creative mind. But they also spoke of something even more unsettling, that the human being carries within themselves the same spark that gave rise to the cosmos, that there is a way to reverse the forgetting. And that path was all described right there. That's why many scholars say the publication of the Corpus Hermeticum was the secret spark of the Renaissance. Because more than beautiful paintings and architecture, what Renaissance artists were really seeking was to re-enchant the world. And Hermes offered exactly that, a reconnection with the sacred that lives in all things, a sacredness that doesn't require blind faith, but inner vision. But not everyone was ready for that. These texts started to circulate among initiates in Renaissance Florence, but they caused discomfort in official religious circles. After all, how do you explain a book that says God is inside man? How do you accept a doctrine that puts self-knowledge above dogma? How do you tolerate a spiritual vision that says the world is a mental illusion created by a divine logos, and that we are active parts of that logos? That's why the Corpus Hermeticum was also hidden, catalogued, silenced, discredited for centuries, labeled as superstition, as minor philosophy, as unfounded myth. And even so, it never stopped circulating. It found shelter in the hands of alchemists, mystics, Gnostics, and Rosicrucians. And now, like a seed that sprouts after millennia, it appears again, not as a historical curiosity, but as a calling, a reminder. Because within those 14 treatises, hidden beneath layers of metaphor, there's a spiritual technology, a map for return, a manual for awakening, and that manual begins with a name, Poimandres, the first treatise, the first key. It's in this one that Hermes hears, for the first time, the voice of the nous itself, the divine mind, and what he hears changes everything. Poimandres doesn't speak to him like a master teaches a student. It speaks like a living consciousness, like a higher intelligence that penetrates directly into the soul. The words aren't meant to be understood with the brain, but to be absorbed with the essence. And that's where the magic of the Corpus Hermeticum begins. Because this book wasn't made to be read, it was made to be remembered. It's as if every sentence were a vibrational key, created to open internal portals that have been sealed since birth. It's not an exaggeration to say that what's written in these treatises is dangerous. Dangerous for those who want to keep consciousness asleep. Dangerous for those who profit from human forgetting. Because this knowledge breaks the veil. It reveals that the world we live in isn't the real world. It's an image, a projection, a shadow of the true reality, which is divine, subtle, and infinite. And more than that, it shows that the human being is a mirror of that hidden reality. Hermes begins by revealing the origin of creation. The universe didn't come from chance or from a purposeless Big Bang. It was generated by a divine mind, the nous, that contemplated itself and, in contemplating itself, created. The first manifestation was light, a conscious, creative light. And from that light emerged everything that exists: time, space, the stars, the elements, beings. Nothing was created outside the nous. Nothing exists outside the one. And man was made in the image of that creative mind, but he forgot that. That forgetting is what Hermes calls the fall. The human soul, originally pure, fell into the world of matter. It was seduced by the senses, imprisoned in the cycles of time, fragmented by desires. And in that process, it lost itself. It started to believe it is the body, that it is the name, that it is the pain, that it is the story. But none of that is true. The Corpus Hermeticum is the call to remember who you really are. Hermes doesn't offer a religion, nor dogmas. He offers a mirror. Each treatise reveals an aspect of the spiritual journey, a path of return. He talks about the relationship between man and the planets, the role of the daemons, the celestial spheres, the music of the stars, of death and life as portals in a single cycle. He talks about the soul that, upon leaving the body, must pass through the seven heavens and abandon, in each one of the illusions that bind it to earth, until it becomes pure again, until it becomes light. But the most striking thing is that he reveals something few have dared to say, that man holds within himself all the attributes of God, that he can create like God, love like God, heal like God, manifest like God, because there is no separation. The only thing that prevents this truth from becoming real is ignorance, and that ignorance is broken when you start to see. The Corpus Hermeticum doesn't just talk about heaven, spirit, or the beyond. It also talks about the mind, about the human ability to control thoughts, emotions, and frequency. It teaches that thought is cause and reality is effect, that everything that happens outside starts inside, and that changing reality is not about luck or prayer, it's about vibration. That's why this book can't be read like a novel. It needs to be listened to. It needs to be felt, because it speaks to a part of you that doesn't respond to logic, but to remembrance. You feel when it's speaking the truth, because that truth vibrates inside. It's like an echo of something you've always known but forgot. And that forgetting isn't your fault. It was induced, programmed. And that's exactly why the Corpus Hermeticum was silenced for centuries. Because if you know this, if you access this power, you become free. And those who are free don't submit, don't conform, don't shrink. Those who are free transform. But that transformation doesn't happen from the outside in. It starts in the invisible. It starts with the awakening of the nous, the divine mind within you. And that's what the first treatise teaches. That's why Poimandres is called the first light. Because when it speaks, the world changes. And what it reveals about the birth of the soul will shake everything you believe to be true. And when that light began to shine again, many wanted to put it out. For centuries, the Corpus Hermeticum vanished from the map as if it had never existed. But that wasn't by chance. It was a choice made by institutions that realized the danger of letting this kind of wisdom circulate freely. Because the corpus isn't a text that commands obedience. It teaches how to be free. And in a time when spiritual control was the foundation of political and religious power, that was unbearable. In the Middle Ages, any idea claiming that God could be found without the Church's mediation was considered heresy, and the Corpus said exactly that the divine isn't trapped in cathedrals nor hidden behind dogmas. It is within you. That the true temple is your body, that the altar is your heart, and that God dwells silently at the center of your consciousness. That kind of idea couldn't be allowed to spread. It was too subversive. That's why the Hermetic treatises were persecuted, hidden, burned. The Library of Alexandria, which held thousands of sacred works from Egypt, Persia, India, and Greece, was destroyed in waves of fire and forgetting. What didn't burn was silenced in councils. Only one fragment remained, the Asclepius, preserved in Latin, kept under watch, carefully translated but stripped of context. The rest vanished from the hands of the people, but not from the initiates. Because while the world remained under the rule of darkness, secret orders kept the golden thread of Hermetic knowledge alive. Copied in secret, passed on by word of mouth, encoded in symbols, hidden in works of alchemy, astrology, and art. Hermes never stopped speaking. He just started whispering, and it was that whisper that reached the attentive ears of those ready to hear. Centuries later, during the Renaissance, these manuscripts would reappear like sparks of an ancient fire that never went out. But the impact they caused didn't come just from their content. It came from how that content spoke directly to the soul, because the Corpus Hermeticum isn't like other books. It doesn't explain the path to you. It puts you on it. You don't read it like you read a theory. You hear it like you hear a calling. The words don't speak to your logic, but to your spirit. You feel something awaken as you read, something that's not new but ancient, familiar, as if this knowledge was already inside you and the text was just a mirror, an echo of something your soul has always known but forgot. And that's exactly what makes it unique. The Corpus Hermeticum doesn't want you to believe. It wants you to remember. It doesn't ask you to follow a faith. It calls you to experience. It states that you can know God directly, that no mediators, priests, or rituals are needed. Just purify yourself, quiet down, go within. Because the truth is inside. It always has been. Hermes reveals that the soul is eternal, that it came from a place above the stars, that it descended to experience matter, and that, after the cycle of incarnation, it must return. But the return isn't automatic. It requires inner work. It requires the soul to pass through 7 spheres, each one linked to a planet, a virtue, a veil, and in each one to shed a layer of ego. It's as if the soul were dressed in 7 cloaks, and only by burning them, one by one, can it return to the source it came from. Hermes calls this the rebirth into the nous, the merging of human consciousness with the divine mind, the end of separation, the end of illusion. And that's why, when you touch this text, you're not the same afterward, because it reveals that everything you call reality is a mental construct. That evil isn't an active force, it's just the absence of light. That the shadows you face in life are reflections of your own disconnection. And that the world isn't something that happens to you, but something that emanates from you. Everything is a reflection. Everything is a mirror. And if that's true, if you really are the source of what you live, then the next step is inevitable, because if the world begins inside, that's where the transformation has to happen. And for that, the Corpus gives you a key forgotten for millennia. And it's precisely this key that changes everything. The perception that the world you see isn't fixed, isn't solid, and is definitely not separate from you. To Hermes Trismegistus, everything that exists is mind. Not the limited mind, full of noise and conditioning, but mind with a capital M, the divine mind, the nous, the source of everything. This is the foundation of the Hermetic worldview. Everything that exists in the universe is a vibrational emanation of this original mind. What you call reality is nothing more than a projection, a mental image condensed into vibration, turned into form. And the most unsettling part is that this form responds directly to your internal state. In other words, the external world you live in is a reflection of your consciousness. It mirrors what vibrates inside you. This isn't just some isolated esoteric belief. Today, even science is starting to get close to this truth. Quantum physics has already shown that the observer influences the observed, that particles behave differently depending on the consciousness observing them. And if the foundation of matter responds to perception, then what is real? It's exactly what Hermes taught. Everything is consciousness at different levels of density. You're not living in a solid, fixed world. You're interacting with a moldable, vibrational field, a living fabric of energy that responds to your mind, your emotions, your most subtle inner states. And the more unconscious you are, the more chaotic that field becomes. The more you drift away from the divine mind, the denser and more disconnected your world appears. In the Corpus Hermeticum, this divine mind is described as the nous, a pure intelligence, without form, without limitation, that gives rise to everything. It's where the soul was generated. It's where the soul must return. But for that to happen, the movement of the fall must be reversed. You have to stop projecting illusions and start aligning with what's real. And the real, according to Hermes, is one. The multiplicity you see, people, objects, planets, events, all of it is appearance. Behind this illusion of diversity, there is only a single essence. Everything is one. There's no separation between heaven and earth, between body and spirit, between you and God. Separation is an illusion created by a fragmented mind, and what the corpus proposes is precisely the healing of that fragmentation. Healing doesn't come from the outside. It starts when you quiet down, when you begin to observe yourself with clarity, when you start dissolving the beliefs that uphold separation. Spiritual practice for Hermes wasn't made of dogmas or outward rituals. It was an inner journey of reintegration, reuniting what was separated, unifying what was fragmented. And that union only happens when you recognize everything is mind, everything is one, nothing is outside of you. The treatises of the Corpus Hermeticum describe this journey with precision. They talk about the process of purifying the soul, about the need to abandon what's illusory, decondition the senses, silence the thoughts, and cultivate inner vision. Not as a mental effort, but as surrender. A radical openness to the truth that already exists in you, but has been buried under layers and layers of distraction. And it's at that point that practice starts to become real. Because it's not enough to understand with your head. You need to feel. You need to vibrate. You need to transform the way you see everything, from a glass of water to a star in the sky. Everything is connected. Everything is a symbol. Everything is a manifestation of the same original mind. When this perception begins to awaken in you, something changes. You start to walk differently, see differently, think differently. And then you begin to understand what Hermes meant when he said that man can become immortal not by escaping death, but by uniting with what was never born, because that which is one, that which is pure nous, was never separated, never corrupted. But to access that state, there's a precise path. And Hermes didn't hide it. He encoded that path in the treatises. And each stage of this journey begins with the remembrance of your origin. And when the remembrance of origin awakens, everything begins to shift. It's like an ancient light, forgotten across lifetimes, reigniting in your chest. Hermes called this the spark of the nous, the particle of the divine mind that every human being carries within themselves, even without knowing it. This spark is immortal. It can't be touched by time, nor by death, but it is covered, dormant, buried beneath identifications with the body, with emotions, with social roles, with the illusion of separation. The Hermetic tradition doesn't promise immortality as an escape from death. It reveals immortality as a forgotten nature. You don't become eternal. You remember you always were. And that remembering doesn't happen with the intellect. It happens as a vibrational reintegration of your essence with the source, something no temple, no philosophy, no dogma can offer. Only direct experience can. At the heart of the Corpus Hermeticum, Hermes reveals a path that begins with a shock, realizing that everything you identified with, the name, the story, the fears, the achievements, the traumas, was never you. They're just temporary psychic garments, like shells covering the true self. The first step toward immortality is to strip away those layers. It's self-knowledge, but not in the modern sense of the word, rather in the sacred sense of discovering what in you doesn't change, doesn't age, doesn't disappear. The soul, according to Hermes, isn't born in the body. It descends. Coming from the celestial spheres, it dives into the density of matter and forgets its origin. Forgetting isn't a mistake, it's a stage. Because the reunion with truth only becomes real when the search comes from the incarnated being itself. It's like a fire that burns from the inside out. And the more the soul recognizes the signs, in synchronicities, in intuitions, in flashes of silence, the more it aligns with the nous, the divine mind. But that doesn't happen without resistance. The ego, identified with the dense world, fears dissolution. It calls death what is actually a return. That's why the initiate must die while alive. They must cross the abyss between what seems to be and what truly is. And when that crossing happens, when they stop believing the inner voices that say, "You are this, you can't, you don't deserve," they realize all of that was shadow. None of it was real. And then something happens that Hermes called the birth of the second man. A being who no longer lives according to the impulses of time, but according to the vibration of the eternal. He still walks in the world, still speaks, still breathes, but he's no longer driven by the fear of death, by the desperate search for safety, identity, or validation. Because he's understood, in a lived way, not a theoretical one, that everything that can be lost is not him. That's the true meaning of immortality in the Corpus Hermeticum. It's not living forever in the body, it's stopping the confusion with what dies. When the initiate accesses this state, they are freed from the wheel of compulsive rebirth. They're no longer pulled by the magnetism of matter. Their destiny is no longer guided by desire, but by purpose. They don't flee from life, they dive into it with full presence because they know that everything is sacred. And what happens to someone who lives with that consciousness? They radiate. They don't need to preach, convince, or prove anything. Their own frequency begins to heal, activate, awaken those around them. They become a channel between the visible and the invisible, between the human and the divine. A living priest of the inner temple, but that state isn't given, it's earned, and the journey continues. Because after the inner rebirth, the initiate must go through a deep process of energetic purification, a total realignment between their bodies, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. A process known by the ancients as the ascent through the seven spheres. And that's where true alchemy begins. True alchemy begins when you realize it's not about collecting information, but about burning everything that blocks the light from passing through. And this is where the Corpus Hermeticum reveals its most enigmatic nature. It wasn't written to be read like a manual. It was encoded as a silent ritual. Each treatise, each line, each pause between words carries a specific vibration, an impact that doesn't reveal itself on the first reading, nor the second, but only when the reader has begun to die and be reborn within. The order of the texts is deliberately scrambled. There's no apparent logical sequence, because the logical mind isn't welcome in this sanctuary. It tries to understand with structures, with comparisons, with linear reasoning, but the corpus doesn't operate on that level. It was forged to bypass reasoning and touch the spark. It only opens itself to those who've already started the path of return. And that's the secret of initiation. The teachings are there, but understanding only blooms in those who have already burned part of the ego. Hermes didn't draw a ready-made path. He scattered clues. The treatises don't tell a story. They reflect your internal state. When someone reads them still identified with the external world, everything seems confusing, disconnected, almost too mystical. But when the process of disidentification begins, something changes. The same phrase that once seemed obscure now pulses with clarity. And that clarity doesn't come from the text. It comes from the reader who's begun to align. That happens because the corpus is an initiatory mirror. It doesn't teach, it demands. It demands that you abandon the posture of spectator and accept the experience as the protagonist. That you stop looking for ready-made answers and accept diving into the unknown. It dismantles the ego, provokes the soul, shatters certainties. And every fragment that breaks reveals a truth that's always been inside you, but your mind wasn't ready to see it. It's no coincidence that so many thinkers, from Plotinus to Jung, from Ficino to Giordano Bruno, describe this book as a code that only opens with the heat of the inner fire. Hermetic initiation doesn't happen in external rituals, with candles or symbols. It happens when you read a passage and suddenly you're no longer the one reading. Something in you dissolves, and another presence, silent and sacred, takes over. That's the moment when the book fulfills its purpose. That's why it's useless to try to force understanding. The corpus only reveals its initiatory structure when you begin to live what's written. It begins with the calling, confronts you with the veil of illusion, forces you to face the ego as a prison, and guides you step by step to the point where the mind goes quiet and the being awakens. But all of this is disguised. It's scrambled, like a puzzle that only assembles from within. Those who try to interpret it with haste, superficiality, or arrogance will walk away empty-handed. But those who read with humility, who feel the call and respond with courage, begin to see the patterns reveal themselves. They begin to realize the texts aren't disconnected. They obey a living intelligence, an intelligence that is guiding not only the book, but the awakening process itself. That's why so many gave up and so few move forward. Because the Corpus Hermeticum is not a book, it's a crossing. And whoever dares to cross must be willing to die many times to what they thought they were, because only then can they merge with what they've always been. And it's in this crossing that the most precious key of all is hidden, a key Hermes sealed in symbolic language, and now it's starting to vibrate inside you. What comes next isn't theory. It's living practice. And if you've made it this far, it's because your spirit has already begun to remember. Now, it's time to learn how to use this power. It's at this point in the journey that silence becomes more revealing than 1,000 words. When the initiate reaches Treatise 1 of the Corpus Hermeticum, something happens, not as reading, but as experience. Hermes doesn't encounter a being with an audible voice, but a luminous presence that asserts itself within him. Poimandres. Not an external deity. It's the very divine mind that pulses through all things and chooses, in that moment, to reveal itself. Poimandres doesn't explain. He shows. He shows the beginning of creation, not as a mythical story, but as a living process that's still happening right now, inside you. Because the universe, according to Hermetic teachings, wasn't created once. It's being created all the time, from the original vibration that emanates from the universal mind. When Poimandres speaks, he doesn't use words. He impresses consciousness. You feel it when something inside you aligns effortlessly, when, suddenly, anxiety gives way to clarity, when a problem that seemed impossible organizes itself without you having to overthink it. Poimandres doesn't work through logic. He works through resonance. It's like your mind, for a brief moment, tunes into the source code of existence. And the most astonishing part? It was always there. Poimandres' voice is that intuition you ignored. It's the unexplainable goosebumps when you hear a truth. It's the deep silence that lingers after a meditation that had no technique, just presence. He is in everything that reorganizes. And he doesn't reorganize by force, he reorganizes with light. The chaos of everyday life, the compulsive thoughts, the wild emotions, the cravings that pull you around, all of that is noise generated by disconnection from this greater mind. But when you hear Poimandres, even for seconds, something essential happens. You remember. You remember who you are. You remember what it feels like to live in a state where nothing is missing because you're part of the source of everything. That memory isn't romantic, it's fierce. It shatters all the lies you carried as identity. In Treatise 1, Poimandres says to Hermes, "I am the mind of the all. I know what you desire and I am with you everywhere." That's not a metaphor for emotional comfort. It's a key. The individual mind, when it aligns with the divine mind, stops operating by effort and begins to manifest by awareness. Have you ever noticed how something you deeply wanted only happened once you stopped trying so hard? Because to desire with attachment is to deny that you are already part of the whole, but to desire from unity is to allow creation to flow through you. Poimandres teaches that everything already exists in potential. What we call creation is actually revelation. It's when something hidden in the universal mind finds space to manifest in the human mind. That's why so many sages said the universe is mental, because everything begins in the mind of God, and the mind of God isn't out there. It's mirrored in yours. This experience of fusion between the personal mind and the divine mind might seem out of reach, but you've already lived it. When you had an idea so perfect, it didn't seem like yours. When you felt peace without reason. When you loved someone without expecting anything in return. When you felt courage without knowing where it came from. Those were glimpses of Poimandres. Moments when your identity dissolved for an instant and something greater took the helm. What the Corpus Hermeticum reveals is that this state doesn't have to be rare. It can be cultivated, not with formulas, but with presence, with purification of perception, with detachment from ego. And when that happens, the divine mind doesn't just speak to you. It starts to think through you. Reality stops being a hostile field and becomes a mirror of your inner expansion. But there's something even deeper. The corpus only activates its divine power when you apply it. When you turn reading into practice. When ancient wisdom becomes living action. And that's exactly what you're about to see, because from here on, I'm going to show you how to use Hermetic teachings in your real life. No mysticism, no loose theories, just living, powerful, transformative practice. The moment has come. Now that you've crossed the symbolic labyrinth of the Corpus Hermeticum, it's time to turn all of it into tangible reality, because wisdom without application is spiritual ego. And true Hermeticism begins when you act like an initiate, even in the simplest daily routine. The first practice is conscious presence. In the corpus, Hermes is guided by Poimandres to silence the mind and listen with the soul. That doesn't just mean meditating. It means starting your day without diving into your phone, without drowning your spirit in distraction. When you wake up, before any outside stimulus, sit for 2 minutes. In silence, just breathe and observe. That pause changes the entire vibrational field of your morning, and as Hermes teaches, what is above reflects below. The way you start your day shapes how the whole day will respond to you. The second practice is conscious use of speech. The corpus is direct. The word is creator. Hermes says, the word that doesn't come from truth contaminates the spirit. In other words, watch what you say, who you say it to, and why you say it. Every time you complain, judge, or whine, you're sending out frequencies that shape your reality negatively. Instead, use words as blessings. Before saying something, ask, does this build up? Does this uplift? Does this purify? If not, be silent. Because silence, in Hermeticism, is one of the highest forms of wisdom. Third practice, treat the body as a temple. This isn't about aesthetics, it's about energy. The Corpus says, the body is the altar where the spirit incarnates to manifest the divine. That means what you eat, drink, how you move, and what you think about your body directly affects your soul. Simple practices like drinking water with gratitude, chewing with presence, avoiding excess, and resting with respect aren't small things. They're rituals. Because a disordered body creates noise, and noise keeps you from hearing the nous. The fourth practice is what the ancients called oracular reading. This means the Corpus Hermeticum shouldn't be read like a linear book. Once a week, sit in silence, open the text at any page, and read just one paragraph. Then meditate on it. Don't try to understand it with the mind. Let the symbol work. This is vibrational magic. This reading should be done as if you were in front of a sacred mirror. It's the same logic as an oracle, not to predict the future, but to remember who you are. The fifth practice is the state of constant observation. Hermes teaches that a human being needs to become watchful of their own patterns. Observe your reactions, your emotions, your impulses. When you feel anger, don't repress it. Observe. When you feel fear, don't run. Contemplate. This is called inner alchemy, letting the light of awareness burn through the density of raw emotions. An initiate doesn't deny what they feel. They transform what they feel into wisdom. This is working with the sacred fire. Sixth practice, live the silence between the words. The Corpus says, what is spoken with noise disappears with the wind, but what is heard in silence remains. That's why, every day, practice silence. Turn off your phone, walk without music, eat without distractions, listen more than you speak. Silence is where the nous speaks to you, and if you learn to listen to that silence, you'll receive answers that no technique in the world can offer. Finally, the highest practice, live with the constant remembrance that you are already a part of God. The Corpus Hermeticum wasn't written for you to seek something outside. It was written for you to remember. Every day, when you look in the mirror, look into your own eyes and say, I am a reflection of the divine mind. Do this for 21 days. Observe. Something inside you changes. A vibration begins to settle in. And that's when the ancient text becomes living truth. Because spiritual practice isn't a ritual separate from life. Life is the ritual. And when you start to live with that awareness, the line between the sacred and the ordinary disappears. From here on, the true power of the Corpus Hermeticum begins to reveal itself. And in the next part, you'll discover why so few are able to hold this light without being consumed by it. You noticed, the veil is lifting. And it's no coincidence that the Corpus Hermeticum is resurfacing now, after centuries submerged in forgetfulness, persecuted by the institutions that shaped history to fit their own convenience. When the collective soul begins to awaken, when the system no longer satisfies, when the old structure starts to show signs of collapse, that's when ancient wisdom returns. Not as an archaeological curiosity, but as a living, vibrant, active code. Since the early 20th century, texts once locked away in dark libraries and kept from the people have begun to re-emerge. That's what happened with the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, discovered by peasants in Egypt in 1945. There were apocryphal gospels, Gnostic teachings, revelations about the inner Christ, the divine spark within the human being, All the things the institutional religious system tried to bury. Few knew, but that discovery also paved the way for a new reading of the Corpus Hermeticum. The echoes were the same. The call to the divine within, to reintegration with the all, to freedom from the conditioned mind. In 1995, another milestone, the modern translation of the so-called Book of Thoth. A set of fragments once thought indecipherable began to be revealed in a new light, not as Egyptian superstition, but as a vibrational map of consciousness. This book, attributed to the same source that inspired Hermes Trismegistus, speaks of the soul as a traveler between planes, of the body as a temple of transmutation, of the word as a bridge between the visible and invisible worlds. And once again, time showed that these truths could not be suppressed forever. The modern world, with all its technology, connectivity, and speed, revealed its other face, emptiness. A life full of information, but starving for meaning. And when the emptiness becomes unbearable, the being starts to seek. The wheel turns, the cycle fulfills itself, and the texts that once slept under the dust of centuries are now being read as if they were written yesterday, because they were written for today. Hermes wasn't speaking to his time. He was speaking to the time when humanity would be ready. And that time is now. That's why the Corpus Hermeticum is coming back. That's why the name Hermes is being whispered again. Because those who already feel they don't belong to the illusion of the common world are beginning to hear the call, a silent but urgent call, a remembrance that pulses deep in the soul. You already knew all of this. You had just forgotten. But now, you can't pretend you didn't see. The secret has been exposed. The forbidden wisdom has returned. And it returns because there's a clear mission: to rebuild the lost link between the human and the divine, not through worship, but through embodiment, not through religion, but through awareness. The new era demands that seekers become masters, that readers become alchemists, that the awakened become active. Because what's at stake now isn't just your well-being, it's the way reality itself will be shaped from here on out. And if you've made it this far, it's not by accident. Maybe you're one of those who are starting to feel like you're part of that rebuilding, that you didn't come here to repeat the old world, but to remember that the power that creates worlds also lives inside you. Maybe you haven't realized it yet, but something has already shifted inside you. It wasn't the video or the words. It was the silent impact of an ancient truth moving through your consciousness, a truth that can no longer be unheard. The Corpus Hermeticum is not a book to be understood. It's a book to be felt. It doesn't speak to the logical mind. It touches that part of you that already knew, but got buried under the noise of the world, the repetitions of the ego, the stories you were told about who you were supposed to be. And that's why, while you watched, maybe a tightness in your chest came up, an unexplained emotion, a sudden urge to breathe deeper. That's no coincidence. It's the soul beginning to remember. Because when you read the corpus with presence, you're not just accessing ancient information, you're activating forgotten frequencies. And those frequencies stir everything. They break down patterns, deprogram beliefs, dissolve masks. They don't ask permission, they enter. And if you let them, they transform. This book moves through you like a silent lightning bolt. You might try to resist, to rationalize it, to say it's just some ancient philosophy. But deep down, you know, something in it is too true to ignore. And it doesn't matter if you understand every word or if you've read 1,000 books before. This one doesn't operate through mental comprehension. It works through vibrational recognition. It reveals inside you a mirror you didn't know you carried. And when you look into that mirror, you don't see the you that wakes up every day for another ordinary day. You see a spark of something greater, something eternal, something that was never separate from the source. That's why the Corpus Hermeticum changes your life, even if you don't fully understand it right away. Because it plants, it waters, and little by little, it breaks through the internal concrete where nothing could grow. It creates space, and in that space, remembrance enters, the remembrance that you are not small, that you are not at the mercy of anything, that there is a real, divine, living power pulsing inside you, and that the world only seems the way it does because you forgot that. The truth isn't in the pages. It's in what the pages activate in you. But for that to truly happen, you have to allow it. Allow yourself to be moved, broken open, transformed. And that takes courage, because there's no turning back. Once you feel the truth, you can't pretend the illusion satisfies you anymore. The comfort of the old world no longer fits. And that might be scary, but it also sets you free, because it's at this point that you understand you don't need to become anything. You just need to remember. And everything starts with that silent calling that started vibrating inside you while you were listening. And now, with that vibration lit, there's just one step left before the final revelation. Because what the Corpus Hermeticum reveals at the end is not some hidden secret, but a choice only you can make. And that choice will be the turning point. You've made it this far, and maybe you don't even realize it. But this is already part of the transformation, because by allowing yourself to be touched by these words, something ancient and essential has been reactivated within you. The Corpus Hermeticum was never a book with a beginning, middle, and end. It is a mirror of the universe, and the universe is an eternal beginning. Nothing ends. Everything reveals. And now that this knowledge has crossed your path, it's not going to leave. It settles quietly, germinating until it blooms when you least expect it. This sacred text doesn't require academic understanding. It doesn't want to be interpreted. It wants to be lived. It wants you to feel, in your body and soul, that you were never separate from the source. That every step you've taken, every breath, every choice, has always been a thread leading you back to the center, to the point of origin, to the remembrance of what you are beyond names, roles, and the stories you were taught to live. Now, with everything that's been said, there's only one thing left. Cross. Cross this invisible portal between who you were before and what is beginning to emerge now. And for that, no ritual is needed. Just presence. Breathe with intention. Be silent without expecting anything. And return to the words that touched you. Reread them, not to understand with your mind, but to let them echo through your energetic field. Because that's how transmutation happens. Subtle, deep, irreversible. The Corpus Hermeticum won't give you ready-made answers, because true teaching was never about answers. It was about remembering that the right questions already live inside you, and that the moment you stop searching outside, everything starts to align. The veil lifts, the noise quiets, and the divine, which has always been with you, finally finds space to manifest. You may feel a subtle change in the coming days, a new way of seeing what once felt ordinary, an urge to step away from distractions, a longing for silence, for truth, for depth. That's the call deepening, and the more you listen to it, the more the old world loses its grip, and the new begins to rise. This isn't a goodbye, it's a reminder. Remembrance has no end, it only unfolds. And now, with what you carry, the universe will respond differently, because the portal has opened and it no longer closes. If you made it this far, leave a comment. The divine in me has awakened. That's not just a comment, it's a sign, a vibrational seal. Let's see how many souls are already remembering what they've always been. And if this content touched you in any way and you want to help the channel spread more wisdom like this out into the world, there's a direct support link in the first pinned comment, or you can click the thanks button right here on YouTube. Your support makes all the difference. And now, before you go, a special video has been chosen for you to keep walking this path. It's the next step. It's popping up on your screen now. Click it and I'll meet you there.